1968 Pontiac GTO.
Dude, that's a beautiful color on that car.
Yeah, it is.
It is a 1971 Mustang Coupe.
In 1974, kids in Los Angeles struck metal while digging, uncovering a stolen Ferrari Dino buried beneath their backyard. That bizarre find was just the beginning.
The Ferrari Dino, the car that slept beneath the earth. In the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles, California, the rhythm of ordinary life went on undisturbed in the winter of 1978. Children rode their bicycles down cracked sidewalks. Sprinklers hissed across lawns. Families gathered around televisions glowing in their living rooms.
A $40 million Bugatti sat untouched in a grandmother's shed. A sealed French garage held rare Ferraris and classics for 60 years.
Beneath that everyday calm, however, an extraordinary secret lay waiting. One that would turn a simple backyard into the scene of one of the most bizarre discoveries in automotive history. It all began when two young boys decided to dig. They were doing what children had done for generations, exploring, pretending to find treasure, chasing the thrill of discovery. But what they hit that day wasn't a rock or a pipe. It was metal. Hard, unyielding metal. The clang of their shovels against the buried object echoed differently, carrying a weight that felt out of place beneath the soil. Curiosity became confusion. Confusion became excitement. And soon, that excitement spread. Neighbors came to watch as the boys' parents called authorities. By the time local police arrived, the hole was wide enough to show the faint curve of red metal beneath the earth. What they had struck wasn't a pipe, it was a car. As shovels dug deeper, layers of dirt gave way to what seemed like a tomb. Plastic sheeting appeared first, thick, torn, and wrapped tightly around the shape beneath. It wasn't long before the unmistakable lines of a sports car began to reveal themselves. Red paint, chrome accents, a sleek Italian body. Piece by piece, a Ferrari Dino 246 GTS emerged from the soil, its frame encased in dust and plastic but eerily intact. The sight was both beautiful and haunting. Even in decay, the Dino retained its grace. Its prancing horse badges still gleamed faintly through grime. The body was largely undamaged, though the interior had suffered years of darkness. Carpets were mildewed, seats torn, glass cracked, and engine seized. Yet, somehow, the car had survived its burial. Police officers and reporters crowded around the hole, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a forgotten vehicle. It was a buried Ferrari. How could something so rare and valuable end up beneath a Los Angeles backyard? The investigation began immediately. Records traced the car back to December 1974, 4 years earlier. Its owner, a man named Rosendo Cruz, had reported it stolen near a restaurant in West Hollywood. He had parked his beloved Dino carefully that evening, noticing a valet eyeing it a little too closely. Hours later, when he returned, it was gone. Cruz filed an insurance claim, heartbroken but believing the car had been shipped overseas or dismantled for parts. Ferraris were prime targets for thieves, but no one could have guessed the truth, that the car had never left California and instead lay buried just a few miles away. At first, police assumed it was the work of amateur joyriders who panicked and hid the evidence. But as investigators examined the strange burial, something didn't add up. The wrapping around the car, plastic sheets, old blankets, remnants of carpet, seemed deliberate. The hole had been dug with precision, deep and wide enough to accommodate the entire car. Someone had gone through immense trouble to conceal it. Then came the most shocking revelation. The insurance company's detectives uncovered evidence that the car's owner may have been part of an elaborate fraud scheme. The theory suggested that Cruz and several accomplices conspired to stage the theft, collect the insurance payout, and later recover the buried car to sell it again. But something went wrong. The plan was abandoned, and the car's precise burial site was lost to memory. For nearly 4 years, the Ferrari slept under the soil, its beautiful red body sealed away like a coffin. Rainwater seeped through the ground, forming pockets of moisture that ate away at the undercarriage. The plastic wrap that was supposed to protect it eventually tore, exposing parts of the frame to corrosion. Yet fate, it seemed, was oddly kind. Los Angeles suffered years of drought during that period, sparing the Dino from total destruction. When the car was finally unearthed, crowds gathered to watch the recovery. Cranes lifted the Ferrari slowly from its pit, its tires still caked with soil, its engine dead silent. News cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. The strange spectacle made headlines across America. Buried Ferrari found in L.A. yard. Children peered through fences as the once luxurious car emerged into daylight, its red paint dull and flaking, but unmistakable. The moment was both surreal and tragic. Here was a machine built to race under the sun, to roar across open roads, and yet it had spent years entombed in silence and dirt. After its recovery, the Dino was taken into custody by the insurance company that had long paid out the theft claim. They decided to auction the car rather than scrap it. It was put on display, attracting enormous public curiosity. People came not just to see the car, but to see the story, a legend of greed, mystery, and accidental rediscovery. But even then, the story refused to end cleanly. While on display, parts of the car were stolen. A mirror disappeared, a dipstick vanished, even the owner's manual went missing. It was as if the Dino still attracted mischief and chaos, as it had since the night it was first stolen. Eventually, the car found a new guardian, a man named Bradford Howard. Howard was not just a collector, he was a believer in resurrection. To him, the Dino was not a wreck or a curiosity, it was a story waiting to be rewritten. He purchased the car from the insurance company and entrusted it to a renowned Ferrari restorer, Joseph Capolonga. Capolonga approached the restoration like an archaeological mission. He documented every part, every trace of corrosion, and every layer of paint. The process took years. Underneath the grime and wear, he discovered that much of the original structure had survived. The frame was intact. The suspension mostly sound and many original components could be saved. Piece by piece, the car was brought back to life. The engine, long frozen, was carefully dismantled, cleaned, and rebuilt. New glass replaced the cracked panes. The faded red paint was restored to its original luster, glowing once more like molten metal under sunlight. Every screw, every trim, every badge was replaced or polished until the Dino once again resembled the masterpiece it had been in 1974. When it was finally complete, the Ferrari was more than just a restored car. It was a reborn legend. Bradford Howard registered it under the license plate, DG, a tribute to its bizarre history. And when he drove it for the first time, cameras followed, capturing the sound of an engine that had not breathed for decades. The Dino soon became a sensation at car shows and classic events. People came not only to see a rare Ferrari, but to hear the story of the car that lived two lives, one above ground and one beneath it. Children who had once read about it in newspapers now stood beside it, eyes wide as they traced their hands along its polished body. The Ferrari Dino 246 GTS, once a symbol of greed and secrecy, had become something purer, a story of fate and rediscovery. It reminded people that even things lost to time can find their way back into the light, that beneath the ordinary surfaces of life, like a suburban backyard, extraordinary secrets can lie just inches below. For collectors and enthusiasts, the Dino's story carries a certain magic. Cars, after all, are not just machines. They are memories cast in metal, symbols of passion, ambition, and failure. The Dino's life tells us that even objects meant for motion can find meaning in stillness. The world has no shortage of buried things, objects, histories, and stories forgotten by time. But every once in a while, something surfaces that forces us to look deeper. The Ferrari Dino did exactly that. It began as a product of design genius, named after Enzo Ferrari's late son, Alfredo Dino Ferrari, who dreamed of lightweight sports cars before his untimely death. The 246 GTS was his namesake, a car that carried not only beauty but legacy. To see such a car buried was almost sacrilege. But to see it resurrected was redemption. Today, the Dino continues to drive, still owned and cherished, still admired wherever it appears. It has outlived its thieves, its conspirators, and even its original owner. Its odometer tells one story, but its soul tells another. A tale of being lost, found, and reborn. When sunlight first struck its red hood again after years of darkness, witnesses said it shimmered like blood. Maybe that's what makes the story so human. Beneath the earth, under layers of time and mistake, the Dino waited, not as a symbol of crime, but of patience. And when it finally returned, it didn't come back angry or broken. It came back shining, roaring, and alive, proof that even in silence, some stories never stop breathing. The hidden collections, the Bugatti, the Bayion garage, and the lost California Spider. When you twist a rusted key in an old lock, you never expect history to exhale on the other side. Yet in the quiet corners of France, that's exactly what happened. Not once, but several times. What began as routine property inspections and inheritance cleanouts became archaeological digs of a different kind, excavations not of bones or pottery, but of metal, oil, and forgotten dreams. There's something haunting about an untouched garage. The air inside feels heavier, as though time itself has been trapped in it. When the door first creaked open in western France in 2014, sunlight pierced decades of darkness and landed on a sight no one alive had expected to see. Beneath a thick quilt of dust lay a fleet of classic cars, rare, elegant, and frozen in silence. Each one was covered with cobwebs and newspapers from another era. The place smelled of rust, aged oil, and stillness. At first glance, it seemed like a graveyard of forgotten machines. But as the light settled and eyes adjusted, outlines began to emerge. Long, graceful curves of fenders, wire wheels, and chrome grills that could only belong to the finest automobiles ever made. There stood a Bugatti Type 57, Lago T26, a Ferrari 250 GT California Spider, and a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Cars whose combined worth would later reach tens of millions of dollars. The property belonged to a man named Roger Bayion, a reclusive transporter and car enthusiast who had once dreamed of opening a museum to showcase the beauty of the automobile. In the post-war years, he had collected dozens of cars, many of which had already become legends by the 1950s. But when his business faltered and debts rose, he sealed his collection away. One by one, the cars were parked in barns, sheds, and garages, their doors shut forever. Bayion's death went largely unnoticed, and for decades, the property was left undisturbed. Nature crept in. Dust gathered like velvet. Rain leaked through the roofs, leaving streaks of rust across hoods. To the world outside, these cars no longer existed. When Bayion's grandchildren inherited the estate, they expected to find old machinery or scrap metal. Instead, they stepped into a time capsule. As the doors opened, the world held its breath. One of the first cars they uncovered was the Ferrari 250 GT California Spider, a model so rare that collectors considered it the holy grail of classic Ferraris. Only about 37 of them were ever built, and this particular one had once belonged to French actor Alain Delon, who was photographed with it in the 1960s alongside screen icons Jane Fonda and Shirley MacLaine. For half a century, this exact car had been presumed lost. Yet here it was, resting quietly under a thin sheet, its once scarlet paint dulled by dust and time. When experts from the Parisian auction house Art Curial arrived, they described the experience as walking through history. It was as if we were stepping into a dream. One of them said, "Every few meters, another masterpiece appeared." The discovery became known as the Bayion Collection, and its unveiling would go on to shock the world of automotive preservation. It wasn't just the Ferrari that drew attention. It was the atmosphere. Old tools were still lying beside tires. Magazines from the 1950s were stacked on workbenches. cobwebs hung like curtains. It was as though the owner had simply walked out one day and never returned. The collection was meticulously documented before being transported to Paris, where the cars were exhibited for the first time. Thousands attended, drawn not only by the vehicles themselves, but by the romance of their rediscovery. Some visitors wept upon seeing the Ferrari, still wearing its cloak of dust, a ghost of a golden era brought back into the light. When the Ferrari 250 GT California Spider finally went under the hammer in 2015, it sold for nearly $18 million in unrestored condition. The buyer, who remained anonymous, later commissioned a restoration that would preserve its originality while returning it to full mechanical life. The car, once forgotten in a barn, now travels the world as a centerpiece of automotive exhibitions, a symbol of how beauty can survive even the deepest sleep. But the Bayion collection was only one part of France's automotive miracles. In another corner of the country, in a small village near La Rochelle, a quiet old woman passed away. Her life had been ordinary, her days unremarkable. She lived alone, surrounded by memories and modest belongings. When her grandson inherited her house, he found among her things a key labeled simply "Garage." Out back stood a decrepit shed with its doors barely holding together. Inside, piles of broken furniture, rusty cans, and discarded tools filled the space. The grandson began clearing it out, expecting to find nothing of value. But on the third day, something metallic glinted beneath a heavy tarp. As he pulled back the cover, the air seemed to change. Beneath layers of dust and decay sat a car that didn't belong in any ordinary garage. Its silhouette was unmistakable, long, low, and impossibly elegant. The grandson called an expert, who arrived within hours. When the tarp came off completely, the man's face went pale. Before them stood a Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic, one of the rarest and most coveted cars in the world. Only 4 were ever built between 1936 and 1938. Of those, just 3 were known to survive. The fourth, chassis number 57453, nicknamed La Voiture Noire, the Black Car, had vanished after World War II, becoming a legend whispered among collectors. Many believed it destroyed, others thought it hidden away by its owner, John Bugatti, who died tragically in 1939. Yet here it was, or at least something that looked like it. Experts spent months verifying it, confirming chassis numbers and cross-referencing factory records. What they discovered was astonishing. The car was indeed an original Type 57 SC Atlantic, possibly even the missing one, though debate continues to this day. The shed had acted as an accidental vault. Protected from sunlight and humidity, the Bugatti remained in remarkable condition. Its hand-formed aluminum body still bore the riveted seams that made it famous. Even in decay, it exuded the kind of presence that made onlookers whisper. Why was it hidden? That question has never been fully answered. Some believe the woman's husband had acquired it secretly before or during the war, fearing confiscation by occupying forces or thieves. Others think it was placed there for safekeeping, then forgotten as generations passed. Whatever the truth, the discovery reawakened the legend of the Atlantic, a car that many thought lost forever. Today, it sits in a private collection, insured for tens of millions, often displayed under soft light at elite exhibitions. It is less a car now and more a myth made real. The French press dubbed it the treasure in the shed, and rightly so. It represented not only unimaginable value, but the persistence of memory itself. Together, the Bugatti Atlantic and the Bayion collection rewrote what car enthusiasts believed possible. They proved that history doesn't always live in museums. It sometimes sleeps in barns and garages, waiting for accident or curiosity to set it free. These discoveries sparked a global fascination with barn finds, a term once used jokingly by collectors but now spoken with reverence. Suddenly, enthusiasts began scouring abandoned estates, old workshops, and sealed garages, hoping to uncover another miracle. But what these stories truly revealed wasn't greed or luck. It was something deeper, the emotional bond between humans and machines. Every one of those forgotten cars was a time traveler. Their engines were silent, but their presence spoke volumes. They were witnesses to decades, silent companions to the passage of generations. They survived wars, weather, neglect, and loss, only to re-emerge when the world was finally ready to remember them. Perhaps that's why, when the lights first shone on the Bayion Ferrari in Paris, spectators didn't gasp because it was worth millions. They gasped because it looked alive. Even under grime and corrosion, the car's shape whispered of motion, of nights on the Riviera, of freedom once felt and lost. The Bugatti Atlantic told a similar story. Built in a time of rising tension in Europe, it represented hope, art, and rebellion. Its rediscovery decades later felt like an echo from another age, a reminder that even the rarest beauty can survive humanity's chaos. Every bolt, every curve of those cars carried fingerprints of the past. They were sculpted by craftsmen who worked with their hands, by dreamers who saw cars not as transport but as art. When buried, locked away, or forgotten, they became relics. When found, they became legends. In the end, the men who uncovered these hidden collections didn't just find metal. They found memory. They found stories frozen in chrome and steel. They found proof that the past never truly dies, it simply waits for someone to care enough to uncover it. And as the dust settled on those rediscoveries, one thing became certain: not every treasure is buried in gold. Some treasures have engines, soul, and the faint smell of gasoline lingering from a world that time almost forgot. The American legends, the lost muscle kings, and the return of forgotten power. America has always had an intimate relationship with its machines. The rumble of a V8 engine, the scent of gasoline on warm asphalt, and the shimmer of chrome under a summer sun. They aren't just aesthetics. They're part of a national heartbeat. For decades, the American automobile symbolized freedom, rebellion, and the pursuit of dreams. Yet, even within this proud culture, some of the most remarkable machines ever built vanished without a trace. Hidden in barns, forgotten in sheds, and abandoned under layers of dust, waiting for the day someone would lift the veil of time. And when that day finally came, the world rediscovered the ghosts of America's golden age of power. The Pontiac GTO, the Shelby Cobra, and the Bonneville Racer, icons of speed reborn from silence. The Pontiac GTO, the tiger in the barn. It began, as many great discoveries do, with an unassuming ad in a local paper. A farmer's estate was being auctioned off in Oklahoma. Among the items listed was simply, "Old Pontiac 1960s, not running." To most readers it was meaningless, but to one man, a classic car enthusiast named Michael Wheatley, that single word, Pontiac, lit a fire. Wheatley drove hundreds of miles, armed with a flashlight, gloves, and a glimmer of hope that this might be something more than scrap. When he arrived, the barn was almost collapsing under its own weight. Inside, he found old tractors, boxes of farm tools, and decades of dust. The Pontiac was there, under a shredded tarp. The farmer's son said it hadn't moved since the early 1970s, when his father parked it after the transmission failed. Whittley lifted the tarp, and his breath caught. The shape was unmistakable. The wide stance, the hood scoops, the split grille. This was no ordinary Pontiac. He wiped away grime from the emblem on the fender, revealing the letters that changed the muscle car world forever: GTO. But as his light swept across the car, something even more remarkable appeared. A small badge beneath the trunk revealed the number, the judge. This wasn't just a GTO. This was a 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Era V, one of only a handful ever made with that engine configuration. The very peak of muscle car performance. With its 400 cubic inch V8 and bold orange paint, it had once been the king of the road. Now it sat silent, its color faded to rust, its tires deflated, its engine seized. Yet the spirit of the machine was still there, as if it had only been waiting for someone to remember what it once was. Whitley purchased it for less than the price of a used compact car. Over the next 3 years, he restored it piece by piece, refusing to modernize it or replace original parts unnecessarily. When it finally roared to life again, the sound shook his garage. A deep, thunderous growl that seemed to awaken the echoes of an entire era. At auction, the car fetched nearly $250,000, but Whitley didn't sell. "You can't sell history," he said. "You can only pass it on." The GTO's resurrection wasn't just about money. It was about rediscovering the boldness of a generation that believed in power, style, and attitude, and proving that some legends, no matter how buried, can never be silenced. The Shelby Cobra. A sleeping dragon in the desert thousands of miles away, another legend was sleeping. Not in a barn this time, but in a steel container on the edge of the Mojave Desert. For decades, rumors had circulated about a missing Shelby Cobra 427, one of the most fearsome roadsters ever built. Designed by the legendary Carroll Shelby, it was the car that had taken American engineering to the world stage, humiliating European competitors at Le Mans and rewriting racing history. The 427 model was the pinnacle, a bare-knuckled powerhouse capable of 485 horsepower and a top speed that brushed 190 mph in the 1960s. Only 260 of them were made, and collectors tracked each one obsessively. But one car, chassis number CSX-3015, had disappeared sometime in the late 70s, last known to belong to a retired pilot who had put it away for safekeeping. In 2017, during the liquidation of an old aircraft parts business, workers opened a sealed shipping container that had sat undisturbed for over 30 years. Inside were dusty crates, an old engine hoist, and beneath a canvas sheet, something that shimmered faintly under the flashlight beam. When they pulled back the cover, time stood still. There it was, the Shelby Cobra 427, complete with racing stripes and original paint, untouched since the Carter administration. The air inside the container was dry, preserving the car perfectly. Even the original Goodyear tires were intact, their tread still sharp. Experts were called in, and when they verified the chassis number, the automotive world went wild. This was not only an original Cobra or Ford 27, it was the very same car Carroll Shelby had used for high-speed testing in the mid-60s. The missing prototype, the Dragon, as mechanics had called it, because it breathed fire every time Shelby tuned it for a new challenge. When the container door opened to sunlight for the first time in decades, the blue paint gleamed like armor. Dust motes floated around it like sparks. After careful restoration and documentation, the car sold at auction for over $13 million, making it one of the most valuable American muscle cars ever sold. But for many, its discovery was more important than the price. The Cobra wasn't just a car. It was a piece of living rebellion, a fragment of the era when one man's vision and determination could take on the might of European racing empires. The fact that it had been forgotten, hidden away like a myth, only made its return more poetic.